Um, Hello everyone, I'm Alexandra. I work at the 3 Million, which is the largest organization campaigning for EU citizens' rights in the UK. At the 3 Million, I am in the role, I work part time, I work in the role of Young Europeans Project Manager. So I manage some research on Young Europeans issues and also a volunteer network of young people campaigning on citizens' rights. But I'm pretty much involved in all the other campaigns in the 3 Million, including some of the ones that I will speak about today. Just a little bit of background about myself. I arrived in the UK in 2012 from Romania, and 8 years later, I finished my PhD in immigration actually. So I pretty much just did immigration throughout my studies, my work experience, about 5 years in research throughout my studies on migration related topics. And since 2017, I've been a citizens' rights campaigner campaigning on EU migrants' rights with the 3 Million, firstly as a volunteer and then in a part-time paid position as the Young Europeans project manager. I also have lived experience of the home office processes. I was rejected permanent residence in 2018 by the home office, then after that later on got my settled status, and 2 weeks ago I actually became British, so I had my citizenship ceremony. I couldn't have it in Cambridge, I had to go to Huntington to a place there for my citizenship ceremony. But I've been living in Cambridge since 2015. And I'm still now kind of in Cambridge, literally 30 seconds out of the Cambridge boundary in southeast Cambridgeshire, but still in Cambridge. So that's kind of my background. Well, EU citizens, as many of you know, were promised in 2016 in the referendum that nothing will change with their rights. We were told by campaigners, including very prominent campaigners at the time, such as Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and Michael Gove, who are all in government at the moment, as you all well know, that don't worry if we vote to leave EU citizens' rights, that's all secured, nothing will change, you'll all be fine. So, what is the situation now? Well, as most of you know as well, EU citizens need to apply for the settlement scheme for either pre settled status if they are in the UK for fewer than 5 years, or settled status if they've been in the UK for more than 5 years, to be able to basically stay in their home in the UK. There have been a lot of issues with the EU settlement scheme. If you are one of the people who are following the Home Office's press releases and press updates, like I do, you'll see a very, very positive picture. You'll be told that over 4 million people, over 4 million applications have been made to the scheme, that a lot of support and funding is in place, and everything's very cool, very fine. But in reality, everyone who works on the ground, either in different political positions, but also as migrant rights campaigners, know that the situation is not as rosy as it is portrayed sometimes. And by that I mean there is still quite a lot of confusion and limited information on the EU settlement scheme, and also in particular the rights associated with pre-settled and settled status. Some of the most common questions I get from EU citizens are, okay, can I access universal credit if I have pre-settled status? Can I become British after settled status? Can I perhaps, is my child born British if I have a child after I get settled status? So there's a lot of kind of lack of information and limited information around the rights associated with settled status, as well as limited information on what should you do after you successfully apply. So how do I maintain my status? What happens if I change my passport number? What happens if I change my UK address? What happens if I change all those personal details? By the way, you have to update them. You have to inform the Home Office every time you change those personal details. But this is something that a lot of people don't know, and this could create a lot of issues in the future. But there are also still people who still have to apply, and we have to be aware of the fact that if people don't apply, the people who don't apply by the deadline, which is 30th of June 2021, will become unlawful in the UK. It's a very serious thing, because if you are unlawful in the UK, you don't have the right to rent, you don't have the right to work, you don't have the right to welfare, you don't have, pretty much you can't carry on your normal life in the UK. So that's very important message to actually encourage people to secure their status. But there's still a lot of issues and a lot of complex feelings that EU citizens have regarding this process. So I'll speak just briefly about the campaigns the 3 million are doing at the moment, the immediate term and then the more longer term. So in the very immediate term, we're running a campaign called Denied My Backup. This is because we have this settlement scheme, so you get pre-settled or settled status as an EU citizen, and it's all digital. So you don't get like an ID or a card or any physical document, I don't know, like an official letter or anything that you could actually use to demonstrate your status. It's all a digital system, and you can already see, anyone can guess what problems this could create. For instance, if I rent a property next year, I'm still, even now when I rented like last month before I actually became a British citizen, you're still asked to provide your right to rent. What happens if you have two prospective tenants and one of them says, yes, here's my residency permit, a physical permit, or here's my British passport or whatever physical document, and the other says, actually, I don't have any physical document. You have to log in this government website, share a code, then log in your email again, then like access the code, and then you'll be able to see the status on the screen if the systems are up and running and accurate, and the government is actually doing a good job with those online systems. We all know what happened with lots of technical difficulties during the COVID time. So it's very worrying, and that's why we're campaigning. We're basically saying that EU citizens should have a physical proof as well, of settled and pre-settled status. We don't say scrap the digital system. We're saying provide this backup, because we have backup for everything. We do online banking, but we still have a bank card. We still can pay in cash if something doesn't work, for example. So we need this physical proof of settled status. How the situation is at the moment. So the House of Lords, for those of you who have been following the discussions there, the House of Lords voted on some amendments on the immigration bill, and the House of Lords voted for an amendment with about 100 majority for the amendment to provide physical proof for settled and pre-settled status for EU citizens. Now this means that this amendment will come back to the House of Commons on the 19th of October, so very soon. So what we're asking people at the moment in terms of campaigning is to contact their MP to make sure their MP is informed about this issue, especially if you live outside Cambridge and you live in one of the Conservative constituencies. Make sure your MP is informed, and I will actually will try to persuade them to vote in favor of the amendment, sharing why this is important. I put a link in the I'll put a link in the chat after I finish speaking with the campaign website and what can you do on this if you want to be involved. Now, in the final 2 minutes or so, the longer term campaigns, I mainly work on two issues in the 3 million: on the future of citizenship and citizenship policy in the UK, and on political rights and representation of EU citizens. And those are topics that are very close to my heart, really, because I didn't feel secure with settled status. So one of the reasons why I became British and applied for citizenship, I still have my Romanian citizenship. I can be a dual national, unlike other people who can't be dual nationals, and it's a lot of, this creates a lot of problems for them. But citizenship is again a very complex area of policy. I'm not sure how many of you know that only the application fee alone, so the basic fee, is £1,330, in addition to a lot of other costs and a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. So we're campaigning for the citizenship pathway to be easier as well for EU citizens who choose to go this way, because obviously citizenship is not for everyone. It's a personal choice. It depends on so many different factors, but we're saying EU citizens who actually want to go on the citizenship pathway, they should have, and everyone, not only EU citizens, but everyone who wants to do this should have a bit of an easier route to it. After getting settled status, if you're married or in a civil partnership with a British citizen, you can apply for citizenship straight away through naturalization. And if you're not married or in a civil partnership with a British citizen, you have to wait 12 months and then you can go through the process. And then the last thing is about political rights. EU citizens again are promised nothing will change, and this in those rights obviously include the very important rights for many of us to vote in local level elections in the UK. Now, we were supposed to have the local elections in 2020, which was still in a transition period, and those are postponed to 2021. So the local elections will happen in 2021, and only because of this, COVID situation, that we still have, EU citizens still have the right to vote in 2021. After that, it's all up to negotiation. The UK approaches this issue bilaterally, which means it negotiates with every single individual member state, and so far has only reached agreements with a few EU member states. So we're saying that everyone who is, already here, who was promised those rights, should still continue to be able to participate in local elections beyond 2021, and we'll really start on this campaign in 2021 around the local elections as well, to make sure that people can have their voice heard in their local communities. And then I'm also, this is linked to participation, because it's important people participate and are able to participate in politics, but also linked to representation. We have about over 5% of the population of the UK is an EU citizen. In Cambridge, for example, about 2 in 10 people, 2 in 10 residents are EU citizens. Yet, if you look at the political level, local level across the country, really, we have comparatively quite few people who are in political functions or elected councillors, for example, and so on. And we need both kind of types of representation. First of all, we need people like Huff in the council, for example, who raises those issues. So people who are not necessarily from like the community that you want to represent, but who, you know, raise the issues of that community on their behalf as well and doing a good job at it. But also we need people from that actually community to be represented in politics. And we'll work on this issue as well. So if anyone is interested in this issue of political representation and voting rights as well, please do get involved with the 3 million. So finally, what can you do in the immediate term? I'll post the link to the Denied My Backup campaign. Write to your MP about the need for physical proof to avoid further discrimination in the future. Then I'll post some links about how to support and follow the 3 million in terms of being up to date with our campaigns, including the ones I spoke about, you know, coming in 2021, especially on citizenship and political rights. And I would say more generally, because we're all like, I think like we're all, most of us are around Cambridge or in Cambridge. Speak to people in Cambridge who are EU citizens, whether you're spending more time online those days or whether you still spend some time in socially distanced places in your local community. Speak to EU citizens. As I said, about 2 in 10 people in Cambridge are EU citizens. Make sure they, you know, have secured their status. Make sure they know where to seek support. And on that note, I'll also post a couple of links of some charities who provide free immigration advice to EU citizens in different languages. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the 3 million. The 3 million is not accredited to give legal advice to people on their individual cases, but we can signpost people to other organizations to get that legal advice. So yes, I think I will end there, and I'm happy to answer more questions in the Q&A.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. That was a great introduction to get us all going. I think I'll just say before moving on to Haf that if you'd like to submit any questions during chat, we'll wait till after Haf has finished her opening address. But please do submit your questions in the meantime. So over to you, Haf.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Alex. That's a really comprehensive background there. Right, so it's really lovely to see that so many people have joined the call, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part. As Paul said, I'm Hav Davies. I'm a city councillor for Abbey Ward in the east of Cambridge since 2019. And I've also very recently become chair of the City Council's Environment and Community Scrutiny Committee. So supporting EU citizens is obviously a priority for me as a ward councillor, and also because of my interest in communities across the city. Now, I'm not here because I know all the answers about how to support EU citizens in our community after Brexit, but what I can do is provide an overview of the local organisations working to support EU citizens with the settled status process here in Cambridge in particular. I can explain how the City Council fits into that equation, and I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts and questions about what we can all do as a community over the next few months up until the deadline in particular. Now, obviously, we all want non-UK EU citizens in our community to be able to stay in the UK after Brexit. Cambridge is a proudly international city, and EU citizens are a really valued part of our community. And Alex has covered a lot of the background on settled status and the difficulties facing many EU citizens in applying and navigating the process. And as Alexandra said, the application process can be very difficult for some, like those who are, for example, digitally excluded, so they may not have access to or be comfortable particularly using a computer or a smartphone, and the process is digital first. It can also be very difficult for people who have complex cases, for example, due to having experienced homelessness. And fundamentally, there are many people who never thought they would have to prove their right to live in the UK, who are now grappling with an unfamiliar process. And these can include older people who've been here for many decades and others struggling to find and fill in paperwork from many years ago. Alexandra has also outlined some of the other issues with the mechanics of the scheme, so things like not receiving physical proof of status, and obviously there are running campaigns at the moment trying to address some of those issues. But some of the issues around settled status have been made even more difficult than they already were because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So many of the organisations that support residents to apply for settled status have had to change the nature of their support as face-to-face interactions stopped being safe. In this sense, experiences of applying for the EU settlement scheme shed light on many underlying social issues that desperately need to be addressed, with digital inclusion being a prime example. So it's one of those things that compounds existing vulnerabilities for many people. At this point, I'd like to just give a quick snapshot really of the main organisations offering support with settled status applications in Cambridge itself. We're really lucky to have a brilliant network of community and voluntary organisations in the city that offer really great services to residents. So the first of these is the Cambridge Citizens Advice Bureau. So the CAB can help with advice on whether you are entitled to settled status. And if you are, they can explain how you can do that and what documents you may need to verify who you are. There's also the Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum, who can provide assisted digital support for people needing to help with an application for EU settled status. So ECF, they can't provide immigration advice on any EEI applications, but they do work in partnership with a level 3 accredited consultancy based in Cambridge who can. There's also Cambridge Online, which is a really great local digital inclusion charity. And they are also able to help residents through the government's settlement scheme assisted digital project. So essentially they offer a service for people needing digital help for the scheme. So while Cambridge Online can't provide legal advice or guidance, they can help with the actual practicalities of the digital process of applying. And lastly, Cambridge Central Library also offers digital support with online EUSS applications. So how does the City Council support this work and fit into this network? So one key function is to help raise awareness of the settled status scheme. As Alexandra said, it's very important that people get their applications in before the deadline because the consequences of not doing so put people at risk. So for example, here in Cambridge, the leader of the council has written to all non-UK EU residents on the public electoral register in Cambridge. So this was both to raise awareness of the scheme and also to convey the message that EU citizens are really important and a valued part of the Cambridge community, as well as promoting the help that is on offer across social media. The council's also used its unique communication channels to inform residents of the scheme. So, for example, including information in Cambridge Matters, which is a magazine that goes to every household in Cambridge, doing the same with Open Door, which goes to council tenants, advertising the scheme at local community and leisure centres, and providing information on the EU settlement scheme in council tax bills, which go to every household, not only those who are on the public electoral register. So some of these are blanket techniques, but the hope is that by virtue of being so, they might help to reach some of those who could benefit from the scheme and aren't necessarily online or on the electoral roll. The council can also help to support the local assistance available. So, for example, the council made a translation contract available to the 3 local organisations to support EUSS queries and applications. So, going forward, what should we do to support EU citizens after Brexit? Now, the council will of course continue working to raise awareness of the scheme and to support local organisations like the Citizens Advice Bureau and the Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum. And it's important that we as a community work with and support outreach efforts. So prior to lockdown, Alexandra and I and a number of volunteers from Cambridge for Europe, some of whom I can see are on this call, held a stall on Market Square to help distribute information materials from the charity Settled, and to answer questions on the EU settlement scheme from residents. Now, obviously, we aren't able to continue with these stalls due to COVID restrictions, but it's important that we look for other opportunities to cooperate and collaborate as a community to raise awareness. And as a result of the pandemic, there is now a really strong network of very local level community organisations right across the city. And looking at how to work with this network going forward is something important to explore. It's also worth noting here exactly what Alexandra said before, which is that hearing about the scheme from family, friends, neighbours, people in your local community is really important, especially as understandably not everyone is tuned into all the comms that goes out from statutory bodies. So small steps like checking in with friends, families and neighbours can really help. So that's it from me. As I said at the beginning, as well as doing my best to answer any questions, I'd be really interested to hear some of your thoughts and ideas as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Haf. Right, so Cllr, do we have any questions?
Well, just let people know in the chat window that Alexandra and Paul have been putting in various web links that anyone can look at. Just going on from the top, a few comments. One person commented, I think Alex commented already, citizenship is way too expensive at the current time. A question, can EU citizens with settled status apply for citizenship? I think that's been answered already. Have you? Alex?
Yes, definitely happy to answer that. Yes, I totally.
What about pre-settled status?
So I can give an overview of that. So pre-settled status is limited leave to remain under the EU settlement scheme. This means that if you have pre-settled status, you are allowed to stay in the UK for 5 years. Pre-settled status actually expires in 5 years. So it's very important to inform that everyone who has pre-settled status actually needs to go again through the system once they reach 5 years in the UK and apply for the full settled status. Because pre-settled status is just a nice marketing technique to call it pre-settled and settled status. It's limited leave to remain, pre-settled status, and settled status is indefinite leave to remain, which means that you can remain in the UK indefinitely. And that's why we also have this difference in rights between pre-settled and settled status, because settled status, for instance, offers you the same rights to welfare, for example, as British citizens, whereas with pre-settled status you may be asked for additional evidence depending on what kind of things that you're applying for. And that's why a lot of people that I speak to have some issues applying for universal credit in the COVID time, for example, because they only have pre-settled status and they were asked for evidence they worked before in the UK or other type of evidence, whereas settled status automatically entitles you to that. So you can apply for citizenship after you get settled status. So first of all, you have to have indefinite leave to remain. That's the first step. And then it depends if you're married or in a civil partnership with a British citizen or not. If you're married or in civil partnership with a British citizen, after you get your settled status, so let's say you got your settled status on the 1st of November, you can apply the next day for citizenship and go through the process. If you are not married or in a civil partnership with a British citizen, like I wasn't, you have to wait 12 months. So I got my settled status on 1st of October, let's say 2020, and then you can apply for citizenship on 1st of October 2021, so 12 months, regardless of how many years you've been in the UK before. Yes, totally agree. It's very expensive. So just to give an overview of how much it cost me. So the very basic application fee for citizenship is £1,330. That's the fee you pay online when you submit the online form. In addition to that, you need to do a Life in the UK test, which is a multiple choice test on UK culture and history and so on, which costs an extra £50 plus the travel to go to the test center and back and so on. Then if you didn't study in the UK at university level, or if you don't have one of the accepted qualifications, you also need to book an English test at level B1 that you have to pay for, obviously on top of it. And then you have to pay for various other kind of costs. For example, the citizenship ceremony. I had my citizenship ceremony in Huntington, going that back and forth. Sometimes people have to translate documents. So I would say kind of overall it's about like £1,500 for a person to apply for citizenship. So that's why one of our campaigns in the future that will start on actually at the end of this month, we'll have a webinar on citizenship in the 3 million. We'll focus on the cost issue, because this is by far the main barrier for EU citizens to become British after getting settled status. It's the huge cost, and by the way, it's the most expensive in Europe, in case if you wonder, and it's about a third of the price, more than 3 times the price of the second most expensive citizenship in Europe.
Thanks, Alex. Actually, could I follow up with just a question following up from that point a bit about because you mentioned pre-settled status doesn't carry all the rights that settled status does. I've noticed a lot of discussions and even some statistics that a lot of people who are getting pre-settled status when they felt that they should have been entitled to settled status. I was just wondering, is that much of an issue, or and why might that be the case?
Well, that is a very worrying thing, because there are like different types of scenarios. So first of all, there are people who just don't have evidence. So they've been in the UK, let's say they've been in the UK for more than 5 years, but just don't have. You have to prove that you've been in the UK at least 6 months every 12 months for 5 continuous years to get settled status. So there are a lot of people who don't have the right documents for various reasons, from like very complex cases such as victims of domestic violence, for example, or like people who just don't have the documents for different reasons. And in that case, I really suggest, if you know someone who doesn't have the right documents but has been in the country for 5 years, do refer them to one of the charities that offer free immigration advice, because there are many ways that you can actually get documents. For instance, if someone has been homeless for a period but has been visiting a homelessness charity and getting some support, you can get a letter from that charity for proving some residence, for example, just to give you an example. Or parents, if they have children in school but they haven't had like enough evidence for them, they could also get letters from the children's school as well to kind of confirm that they've been picking up their children from school, for example, because you have to prove that you've been in the country. But what is really worrying me at the moment is that I heard this a few times, people who said, well, I only got pre-settled status because I applied to that because it was easier. No, like, don't settle for pre-settled status. If you've been in the country for 5 continuous years, don't accept pre-settled status. Do submit additional evidence. It's not only about there are some differences in rights, but also the fact that it's not forever. Like, pre-settled status is for 5 years. It's a limited permit to live in the UK for 5 years, and if people don't remember to apply again, it expires. What happens after your immigration permit expires? You become unlawfully resident. So it's not only, we're not speaking only about this deadline of 30th of June 2021 when the scheme ends. We're also speaking about another deadline, which will be the main worry of the next government, when people who have pre-settled status will all have to transition to settled status in order to preserve their lawful status in the UK. A couple of differences. There's some differences in access to welfare that have been seen a lot in the COVID times, but also in terms of how long you can leave the country. So if you have pre-settled status and if you leave the country, the UK, for more than 2 years, you lose your pre-settled status. But also, if you leave the country for more than 6 months, then you break your continuity of residence. So then you won't be able to have continuous residence for settled status. So that's another issue now with COVID, because a lot of people are abroad for more than 6 months and they really fear that they won't be able to apply for settled status when they come back. And with settled status, you can leave the country, the UK, for up to 5 years. So again, it's indefinite leave to remain, but on the condition that you are not leaving the country for more than 5 years, continuous years.
There's a question from someone. I know you can't give individual advice, but it is a situation that may apply to lots of people. My passport, I already have settled status, but I need to renew my passport at a tricky time.
Yes, there's a lot of issues with passport renewals now. Like, first of all, people who haven't applied yet to the scheme, obviously the first step is to prove your identity. You can do this if you have a passport or a biometric ID card. You can do this through a phone app, which is the EU Exit ID Document Check app. But if you don't have a biometric ID card or passport, such as if you are a Romanian citizen and you only have your national ID card and you don't have a Romanian passport, our ID cards are not biometric, for instance, in that case, you have to send your ID in original to the Home Office for verification, and the Home Office will send it to you back, and then we'll be able to process your application. Also, it's important to remind people that when they change their passport, so I have to renew if I had to renew my passport, let's say next year, it's again the government put the responsibility on the individual and not the state to renew those details. So if you change your passport, you have to log in the Home Office website, which is called I think it's called Update Your EU Settlement Scheme Details, the specific page, and then you kind of change your details there and kind of scan the ID. Now it can be done online. So yes, it's important to do that. Now, it's a very difficult situation for people who are still waiting on their ID. There are some ways that you can apply through a paper form without ID. But again, you need to contact to have legal advice for that from one of the charities who provides free legal advice on that. And that is only if you can actually make a case that it is impossible for you to get an ID, or like very, very unlikely that you'll be able to get an ID. So you need legal representation for that if someone finds themselves in such a case.
Yeah, so so someone's asking, are there any organizations specifically reaching out to EU citizens from a Roma background, for a multinational community facing all kinds of obstacles, linguistic, digital, economic, etc., and maybe understandably distrustful of officialdom?
Yes, Roma Support Group is one of they're based in London, but they work across the UK. So that's one of the organizations that we collaborate with in the 3 million. I can put a link on the chat. It's called the Roma Support Group. But I think there are also more regional ones. I know there's like Luton Roma Trust. I'm not sure if anything is in Cambridge working specifically with Roma communities.
Yeah, I also think that Settled has a particular stream looking at this as well, which I think the link to Settled has been shared in the chat already. But I know that that's something that they were looking at as well. So yeah, so I think it's a stream within some of those kind of larger organizations, but also, as Alexandra said, there are specific groups working on that in particular as well, because as you said, it is one of those things where if there are any obstacles already in place, then the EU settlement scheme will often play into those and make those groups more vulnerable again.
Yes, so there's a couple of links to settled information for Roma are on the chat window. Someone asks, is it still possible to apply for settled status via an app, or does it have to be the gov.uk website?
So there are two parts of the application. It's again something that's quite worrying, because I got a lot of cases of people who said, why haven't I received my settled status? And it's because they only did their ID check. So the first step of the application is checking your identity. And this is done through the phone app or through sending your ID to the Home Office if your ID is not biometric. And that's the EU Exit ID Document Check app, which is on your phone. After you check your ID, let's say you have a biometric passport, you checked your ID, everything done on the app, then you need to go to the government website to continue the application. You of course can do this through your phone, or you can switch your device, you can go through a laptop or like a computer, PC, whatever you want to use. But it has two steps. So the first step is checking your ID through the phone app. Second step is going on the website and completing the online form where your residency will be checked. So for most people, they will put their national insurance number, and then the website will run some background checks. And if they find enough information on you, they will say, okay, this person qualifies for settled status. But if you don't find enough information, you will have an option to upload additional evidence. So you can scan the documents and upload PDFs of the documents on the actual form there, and then it would be like some criminality questions about criminal record, and you submit your application. So make sure that everyone who applies, make sure that you do the ID check on the phone app, but also you continue your application, and make sure you get a confirmation email for the application, because if you don't get a confirmation email from the Home Office, it means that you did something wrong or didn't go throughout the process until the end of the process.
So someone's asking, I have permanent residency. Can I bypass settled status and apply for citizenship straight away with permanent residency?
Yeah, so it's a bit of uncertainty how long those permanent residency cards will still be valid. Of course, the permanent residency blue cards are within EA legislation. So when this legislation will cease to apply in the UK, those will be invalid. So for people, first of all, people who have permanent residency card and are not thinking to apply for citizenship as soon as possible, they will need to exchange them for settled status. So permanent residency card won't be valid very soon. Therefore, you need to go through the settlement scheme application, and there will be a question there saying, do you have any of these? And you click the permanent residency, and then this means that you still go through the form, you still complete the criminality questions and the ID check, but you won't have to submit residency evidence, because your permanent residency card and the number on your permanent residency card will still count as evidence, and you'll get settled status. It's a tricky question if you want to apply for citizenship, if you can still use that. I mean, it's technically still valid now as we speak. I'm not completely sure what will happen after the 31st of December. I mean, technically we are out of transition, and those documents are because we have EA legislation still applying in the UK. So I would suggest, I can put a link again, I would suggest getting in touch with one of the charities who offer free citizenship advice to basically ask how much time do you actually have to submit this application on that basis. At the moment, citizenship applications are still accepted on the basis of permanent residency, but you can also use your permanent residency to exchange it for settled status and then apply for citizenship on the basis of settled status. The advantage of using permanent residency is that you don't have to wait this extra 12 months, but if you have settled status and you're not married to a British citizen or in civil partnership with a British citizen, then you need to wait 12 months regardless of how long you've been in the UK before that. But I'll put a link about the citizenship advice.
So someone's asking, comprehensive sickness insurance ignored for settled status. Have you had experience of the Home Office using lack of comprehensive sickness insurance to refuse citizenship?
Yes, so when we had Theresa May as Prime Minister, during that time, Theresa May scrapped this requirement for comprehensive sickness insurance for settled status specifically, for the settlement scheme, for both applying for pre-settled and settled status. And that was because when we had the old system, which is the permanent residency cards that some of us have, or had before, in that system, about a third of applications for permanent residency were rejected, including mine in 2018. And one of the main reasons was this lack of CSI, so comprehensive sickness insurance requirement. Citizenship policy is much more complex, and you have to do a lot of extra things after you get settled status to get citizenship. How it is at the moment is that the Home Office will check for citizenship. I mean, that's what the guidance say. They will check whether you were lawful in the country. Now, what means to be lawful as an EU citizen? It means that after your 3 months initial period under EEA law that you are you can visit any EU country. After 3 months, you have to be in one of the four what is called qualified person categories. Under the Freedom of Movement Directive 2004, those categories are worker, self-employed, self-sufficient with comprehensive sickness insurance, or student with comprehensive sickness insurance. So you have to prove that you are somehow in those categories. Now, the problem is a lot of students, for example, especially in Cambridge, a lot of people who did like their studies in Cambridge, they come to me and say, well, I didn't have health insurance during my PhD or my master's and so on. If you just look by the law, technically speaking, you are not actually exercising your treaty rights if you are a full-time student, are not working, so you can't classify as a worker, and you don't have comprehensive sickness insurance. Now, this is something that students were never informed, and other people, so it doesn't only affect students, it affects stay-at-home parents, for example. It affects people who are self-sufficient, just living off their savings, for example. This was something that was never informed or enforced. We all know when we go to the GP or we use NHS services, no one ever asked us for comprehensive sickness insurance, because that's how it works. However, for citizenship, they do check whether the residence was lawful, and that's how it's interpreted under EEA regulations. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that all the applications are rejected, and actually I haven't seen a rejection case on citizenship based on this reason so far. However, a lot of applications are waiting for quite a long time, and I'm not really sure whether there will be rejections or not in the future. I just say I haven't seen myself so far. But there's also this interesting concept of Home Office discretion. So unlike other applications that are more like tick boxy in the Home Office, citizenship has quite a lot of discretion of the caseworker. So when the caseworker assesses your case, they could actually have discretion saying, well, if you're missing this particular document, they could still grant that application. But again, it's not an exact science. We don't actually know when discretion will be applied. So that's why, again, if you are in this situation, I do suggest you speak with someone who is a citizenship advisor to actually see your case, to see perhaps you can actually qualify as worker. I met quite a lot of students, for example, who thought I can't ever apply because I didn't have insurance during my studies, and who actually did work part-time during their studies, but didn't realize they could use that evidence and actually apply as a worker rather than a student. So yeah, there's some different issues there. I will leave a link. I'm looking now up the link to give that to your leadership.
Yeah, I think there's one, but looks like a follow-up question to that is what about EHIC cards? Now, I presume that doesn't refer to people coming here as a tourist with an EHIC card, but if you come here as a student and you have or something, and you have an EHIC card from your own country for that time, would that cover your comprehensive sickness insurance requirement?
To my understanding, I'm not 100% sure about this, but to my understanding, EHIC cards are for very short-term periods. So if you're like someone who wants to prove like 5 years of self-sufficiency, for example, you need other forms. By the way, the CSI doesn't necessarily mean like private or expensive health insurance in the UK. There are other forms of insurance people have. For instance, some of my friends in Romania, just to give an anecdote, were insured through their parents. So they were like studying or working here, but they had like a family insurance policy in Romania. So they were able to use that as evidence that they were insured. So basically, you need to prove that, like, if something, how the CSI works is that if something bad happens to you in the UK and you get, a more expensive treatment in the NHS, then actually the home country pays the NHS, transfers money to cover for your treatment. So yes, I think, again, like, ask someone. I will post the link. Ask someone who is more knowledgeable on that, on what actually CSI means. But it's not only private health insurance. It can mean various things, and it's really very diverse depending on each EU country. Each EU country operates their insurance policies very differently. So I won't know how to advise on individual countries.
One question: what happens if the UK does not come to an agreement with the EU? Where does this place EU citizens? Presumably, the withdrawal agreement still holds.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because like technically a lot of things can happen. I mean, in terms of government commitment, we did have commitment that like the citizenship part of the agreement will remain untouched. And actually, when there were some discussions about no deal Brexit, the 3 million other organizations wrote to the government saying, okay, whatever happens, make sure that this part of the agreement actually stays. I don't think it's in anyone's interest, either in the UK or the EU, to have that particular part of the agreement, which is part 3 on citizens' rights, because this doesn't only cover EU citizens in the UK, it also covers the over 1 million British people in other EU countries who will also have, many of them, to have a similar process as settled status. Some of them have like a easier process of just registering and not applying for status, but again, their rights need to be protected too, and that is covered in the withdrawal agreement.
What about EU citizens who arrive in the UK just before the end of the transition, or maybe even after the end of the transition, when the new immigration regulations are in place, but they're still before the deadline for applying for settled status? Either of those two situations.
Yes, so the deadline to apply for the EU settlement scheme is 30th of June 2021, but you need to prove that you were in the UK before 31st December 2020. So you need to prove that you are physically present in the UK, i.e. you had an address, or you had a job, or had anything with your name on, that you are a resident here before the transition period ends. So no, if you just arrive for the first ever time in the UK in January, you'll have to go through the points-based system. You won't be able to qualify for the EU settlement scheme. It's actually a very interesting issue with a lot of students now. I know case of students who started their degree in the UK now in September, but universities are online, and they, for various reasons, including health reasons, they stay, let's say, in Romania, and they think maybe I will come in February. And that's something that we wrote to universities about, to actually ask the Home Office to clarify this policy, because as things stand at the moment, you actually need evidence that you're physically present in the UK. So even if you start in university but you do like a distance course, this is pretty much kind of like if you do, I don't know, open university course from Romania and you're not ever resident in the UK. So we're asking the Home Office to clarify the policy on that. But this could be an issue for a lot of people who started something in the UK, either a university course and an online job, and they are not able to prove that they were physically in the UK before this end of transition. Is something very, very worrying. And then everyone else who comes after 1st of January 2021, that's the Australian style points-based system. There are some, not very many, but some details online on the government website. There will be different types of visas, including high-skilled worker visas, student visas. It will be similar to non-EU students at the moment, including the process. And yeah, I'm not an expert on that side.
There's a few questions, a variation on a theme. How can we help? And also, how do we engage with EU citizens in our local area to let them know about the need to get settled status?
Half?
Yeah, so I was going to suggest that we address these two together, so that sounds good. So the first thing that I would say, particularly on engaging people in your local area, is that, so obviously some of the measures that we've done before, like a stall on Market Square, for example, are no longer doable because of COVID restrictions, but there is plenty more that can be done. And I think remembering the social and neighbourhood networks that have built up during the course of lockdown, it becomes really important here. So I would absolutely suggest sharing resources for the local level support that is available. So particularly Citizens Advice Bureau, the Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum, Cambridge Online, as well as organisations like Settled and Here for Good that can help with complex cases. And in order to do that, I would suggest thinking about the networks that you're already a part of, or becoming part of some networks that would prove really fruitful for this. So things like, if you're in a residents association, a neighbourhood watch, a community group, you know, those are forums where sharing this information can be really helpful. People are often, you know, open to hearing things from friends, family, neighbours. And also, I would suggest that if it is an option, to ask your employer what support and what information has been given to staff in your workplace as well. And to the person who isn't in Cambridge but has some relevant skills, I would suggest maybe having a look or asking someone in the local council in your area what the on the ground organisations are where you live, and either looking to share those resources or getting in touch with them and asking if those are skills that may be of use to them as well. I don't know if, Alex, there's anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would echo that. In every single local community, town, city, part of the UK, there are a lot of organizations. And I have to say the migration sector is very underfunded. So there always is need for volunteers, especially on, you won't be able to give immigration advice if you're not registered with the OISC as an immigration advisor. But there are other ways to help, such as, distributing online material about settled status. For instance, in the summer, I did some videos in Polish and Romanian, just explaining to people the information on the government website, really, but explain to people in their own language about the settlement scheme. So if you have any language skills, just doing something as simple as posting a short video or a post on social media in different languages saying, did you know about this? Like, you have to apply to this and help this way. We always have various campaigns. Now we're running this Denied My Backup campaign on physical proof of settled status. I already posted a link on how to write to your MP for the campaign, but we always have various campaigns going on. So I'll put the link on how to subscribe to the newsletter, where you'll hear all the updates about the 3 Millions campaigns in the future as well.
Just following that up a little, is Cambridge City Council or the other local councils trying to help employers or working with employers to remind EU citizens to apply for settled status?
Yeah, so I've attended a few meetings with, for example, the Chambers of Commerce about preparations for Brexit in a wider sense, and absolutely, supporting the workforce is one of those key elements that people are looking at. And I'd also add that the council itself is, of course, an employer in and of itself, and so is doing the work internally as well to make sure that officers and staff members have the information necessary. So yes, on both counts. But it is also something that, you know, it's another angle for engaging people that absolutely is something that we should always keep looking at and keep seeing if there's more that can be done.
And another question, which, I mean, you can't give individual advice, but it may affect other people as well, is does your employment status or your earnings affect your entitlement to settled status?
No, settled status is based on residency, not on your activity in the UK. So what you have to prove is that you are physically resident, present in the UK at least 6 months out of every year for 5 continuous years. It doesn't matter if you are unemployed and, you know, on different welfare payments, or if you were working, or if you're a full-time student, or if you're staying at home with your children. It doesn't matter. You have to prove that you are resident. There is a long list of acceptable evidence on the Home Office website. This range from, for example, like bank account statements to mortgage agreements to rental agreements to different bills with your name on. So, like, you know, all those official documents that have your name on and your address in the UK, letters from your GP. So you can do a combination of different kind of documents to prove that you're a resident in the UK. So the only difference is that if you don't have tax or some DWP records, the system won't be able to automatically recognize. So when, for example, when I applied for the settlement scheme, because my work was not consistent all the last 5 years, the system just checks your national insurance number. So if you don't have continuous tax payments, for example, or continuous welfare payments, of some welfare payments are not acknowledged by the system, then you'll get a message saying we haven't found enough information on you. And then it's very important that if you know you've been in the country for more than 5 years, that you say, yes, I want to submit additional evidence, and scan your evidence and upload it. Don't just say, that's fine, I will get pre-settled status, because you will have much more security and better rights with settled status.
Okay, I think, Paul, you have a question for Half?
Yeah, just a very quick question, actually. You mentioned the community organisations that have all sprung up since COVID. For those of us who might not be familiar with our local one, is there a central list of those organisations held anywhere?
Yes, there is. I will find it and I will put it in the chat. But there is a local mutual aid group in, I think, every ward of the city now. And that's a kind of neighbourhood support network that really did come into its own at the beginning of lockdown and was supporting neighbours with be it food deliveries, prescriptions, whatever else. But that process has, I think, built really strong community links right across the city. And in terms of kind of getting to know people in your area and feeling plugged into the neighborhood, it's a really good way of engaging with your kind of micro local community. So I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat. And in general, the communications that go on through those channels are for kind of direct volunteering, in my experience, but there will be people who run those networks who will be in touch with the council directly about community support things, and they're very good people to reach out to. So I'll pop that in the chat, and there's a contact detail for each one of them as well.
Another quick question about is the council working with the Cambridge University and ARU as well to make sure that they're talking to each other, especially with the number of people who are coming into the university at the moment and over the next few months, or not, as the case would be, as Alex was discussing there a few minutes ago.
So both the universities have been involved with the Brexit prep work that was happening, which was joint across more than one district authority in the area. But that's in relation directly to settled status. That's certainly something that I can go back and check with officers and see how much is being done there and whether it's something that we should explore further. So thank you, that's a really good suggestion.
Can I say this very interesting question here? Like, is there any reason for that the government give why they don't provide us physical evidence of settled status? Yes, there is a soundbite. So the government are saying, well, a digital status cannot be damaged or tampered with, when it actually can. I mean, like, we do have cases of when the system didn't work or when the system failed to show the settled status online digitally. So the number one argument is that, well, we want to move towards a digital immigration system because it's more secure and because it cannot be lost and damaged, which it can. Also, it's interesting that the government now have a cost-based argument as well. So they're saying it will cost over £1 million to provide this physical proof of settled status, and it's something they don't want to do also on a cost basis. So that's again why it's important to follow the campaign, the Deny My Backup campaign. You can read a lot more information there, including our arguments against the government's arguments, and write to your MP with some of those arguments. One of the very interesting things is the speed of implementation. So the only country in the world that has a fully digital immigration system is Australia, and all like an Australian system. And Australia actually took more than 10 years to implement the system, and the UK wants to do it in a few months. So even in that system, and they had physical documents as a backup throughout this transition period of over 10 years. So do use the Australia argument when you write to your MP. Say that Australia did have the physical backup.
I think one of the worrying things is slightly for me with that physical backup, the amendment that's been passed by the House of Lords. In the Agriculture Bill last night, the government blocked discussion on the basis of de facto be a money bill, essentially that what the House of Lords are doing would require additional funding for, in that case, a commission to look at trade deals in agriculture. And yeah, so I think we have to absolutely make sure that we win as many MPs over as possible to supporting this amendments. Otherwise, the government might actually just try and not even have it voted on at all.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, like, I get when I posted about this, about encourage people to write to their MP, and like I know how a lot of people feel, and they say like, what's the point? I live, now I live in South East Cambridgeshire. Like I have like Lucy Fraser as the MP. So a lot of people are saying like, well, Conservatives won't listen. Actually, like 8 Lords, Conservative people in the House of Lords voted for the amendment after like a lot of people in the grassroots wrote a lot of letters. So it's not necessarily impossible, but you do need a much bigger majority in the House of Commons. So in the Lords was a bit different, the situation. So yes, I mean, I would say to everyone, like, even if you think there is no chance, to keep on writing and at least try to have a conversation with them if it's possible.
I don't know how we're doing for time, Paul. You're the chair.
Well, we are just over time, but if you speak, we've got 1 or 2 more questions. So if the 2 speakers are happy to go on a little bit longer.
Yeah, there was one. Yeah, just briefly. One was the discussion earlier on health insurance. Is there any reason why people would need health insurance going on from now, say with pre-settled status, for example, to be eligible for to keep their eligibility up for settled or citizenship?
So what I can say, I mean, like with pre-settled, it depends very much on the type of, whether it's primary or secondary care, and like how you need additional evidence for some of the type of care. Like I'm not an expert on that area, but I can link to some resources. But what I can say for sure that a lot of people ask me, so once you get settled status, which is indefinite leave to remain, in the Home Office eyes, you are free of immigration restrictions and you have the same rights to British citizens. So no, from the moment you have settled status, you don't need, I mean, the first thing I did was cancel my private health insurance after.
And pre-settled status?
That's where I'm not actually, I don't think I'm a good enough expert on this, because technically you should have access free at the point of use as everyone, but we had cases during the COVID context where people were asked for some additional evidence, because for example, when you apply for universal credit or different welfare with pre-settled status in itself is not an automatic entitlement like settled status is. So people were asked, for example, to prove that they were, have some residency information, or that they were working before, or that they exercise treaty rights. So there have been some complications on that. So I'm not 100% sure.
Someone's asking, you mentioned that in Cambridge you managed to get information sent out with council tax letters. How can I get my council to do the same?
I would say ask your local councillor, and yes, so that's probably the best way to do it, or your local councillors most likely, and ask that they get in touch with officers and see whether that's something that they could consider doing. Like I said, it's one of those things that is by definition a blanket approach, but the value of that is that it does go to everyone, and it might reach some people who, you know, might not look at the council's Twitter feed.
Just a comment from Pippa Haling saying, I just give up on Lucy Fraser, but that's exactly what we can't do, because immigration status is one of the few areas where constituency MPs can have real influence. So there's still a few questions coming in. There's a combination of comments and questions. What if you forget your password? Even if you already have settled status?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please? So when you forget your password?
What if you obtain settled status but cannot access it as you forgot or lost your password?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's exactly why we're campaigning for physical proof of settled and pre-settled status, because being able to access your rights depends on you being able to access your pre-settled or settled status, especially after the end of transition, and especially particularly after the end of actual settlement scheme deadline. So you are dependent on a lot of things. You are dependent on the government systems being up and running. I mean, the number of times I got like an error message on government websites has been, quite a lot. Then you depend on your details being up to date and actually updated. So you depend on, when I access the status, you have to put your passport number, your date of birth, then have access to a phone, or you get a security code, and you input the security code again on the website, and then you're able to see your status. Then you'll be able to click on the link saying, I want to prove my status to someone, then select from a drop-down menu, where do you want to prove your status? So I say I prove my status to employer, then I have to input my employer details, and my employer receives an email with a security code, and you see where I'm going. I already start explaining 2 minutes. Imagine being in a situation where you work perhaps in a very insecure industry. You have a day job, for example, that if someone has to prove your status, or you're competing for renting a place, in Cambridge or in London. It's very, very difficult to actually prove your status if you forget any of those details. It's also very stressful for people who had someone else apply on their behalf. So for instance, if you're someone with limited English language skills or digitally excluded, and you had a friend or a family member or perhaps a charity applying on your behalf, and they didn't change the details with your own details, and didn't set up an email address for you, and didn't set up your actual details, then you'll be dependent on that person every time you have to prove your status to actually input those details. So it's something that we encourage everyone to do when they apply on behalf of someone else, to actually make sure that person gets their own email address and has control over the details, because otherwise they won't be able to prove. It's not only rent and work. You have to prove your status, after the end of transition. You have to prove status when you open a bank account. You have to prove your status when you access any form of welfare support. So pretty much every step of your life you have to use this system. So that's why it's very important to have a physical backup, especially for people who can't use digital systems, or who are in a situation where they can't use it at that moment. Also, when you go in and out of the country, so the settled status is linked to your passport. So if you go and scan your passport on the e-gates, the machine will know that that's linked to the settled status. But if you change your passport and you forgot to update your details, this computer will say no to that. So then you have to queue up and explain the situation. So again, it's a lot of issues that will be created with this.
Okay, Paul, you're the chair, so perhaps I could leave over to hand back to you, unless you or the speakers see any other questions that I've missed. Perhaps one thing we could do is, even when we finish the chat, we could leave it open for a little while for people to make note of all the links that Alex and Half and you have been posting in the chat window.
Yeah, I was going to suggest to do that, because I've got another one I want to put up later.
Yep.
So Alex is just adding a few more, one on pre-settled versus settled status. I just saw something from Martin there. Yeah, their high tire is the country where you can't access the internet. Yeah. I know that very well. There are places in this county I go when I want to just a break from everything, because I know that I won't get any updates on any sort of mobile technology for the next 3 hours when I go there. But yeah, it's quite it's amazing how patchy it can get. You can get. So that is a very good question. and there's also things, yeah, I mean, I've had, when we were talking about the proving that your status, and how many, you know, initially when the initial discussions about permanent residency, people were talking about having to prove each time and you entered and left the country. Well, I couldn't do that because I had used an email account which had been discontinued when I left that particular job. So suddenly, yeah, there was no record of a dozen trips I'd made abroad or more. But anyway, I digress. I think that was a very good discussion, and I'd like to thank Alex and Haf for joining us tonight. I think we'd all agree it was very informative. I learned quite a few things, actually. Surprising, it's a complicated situation, and I think we all need to really know what's actually going on, and also how we can help. So that was really very good. I'd like to thank Cllr for looking after the questions. It's never the easiest job to bomb up and down through the chats, but he did a great job. And finally, thank you all for joining us tonight and sharing your questions and your thoughts. It's also great to see such a lively, interactive crowd.